What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Long Distance Friends. Today, I have on my very good friend, Jessica Carlisle. Jess is an absolute badass, first of all. She's hilarious. She's a ride or die friend. She is someone who is fierce and funny and a huge protector of the people that she loves and the things that she cares about. She has special training and experience in forensic interviewing, juvenile court. Jess is also considered an expert in the realm of child abuse in Texas. And so she is a very important person to have on the podcast today. We're going to have a good conversation, maybe at times a little bit of a heavy conversation, but an important and empowering conversation nonetheless. So, Jess, welcome to Long Distance Friends.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jess and I go way back. So, we have very fond memories of running cross country together at Kempner High School. Shout out to Kempner High School. Taking lots of joyrides in my truck, Mater. And yeah, I think it's just like so fun to see the friends also both in each other's weddings, minor detail. But it's just so fun to see that the people you grow up with become such amazing, wonderful people who are contributing to society and doing such like incredible things. And so I just have so much respect for you and what you do. And I know at one point, this is something I absolutely love about you. At one point, I know in college, you were maybe considering becoming a prison warden. Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, which is just amazing. So tell me a little bit about your career journey, starting at DBU. How did you choose to go into the field and the degree that you went into? And where did that lead you on your career path? Were you always wanting to work in the child abuse space? Just tell us a little bit more about like A to B.
Sure. So I have a criminal justice degree from Dallas Baptist University. Always knew that I wanted to work in the realm of criminal justice and law enforcement. When I went to DBU, I didn't really have child abuse on my radar. Like you said, once upon a time, I had this super great idea that I wanted to be a federal prison warden. I don't know where that came from, but I just knew I wanted to be the boss, and so that's what I was going to do. Then just going through criminal justice classes at DBU and learning about different components of options of what's out there in the law enforcement space, I started learning more and more about obviously the topic of child abuse. I ended up having a project in my one of my classes that was to pick an area of crime that was of particular interest of me and go and find agencies within that sector to research. And so for me, I was interested in child abuse, and I looked up some local advocacy centers in my area and got connected with where I work now. And so I did a tour of my agency, and I was offered an internship kind of like on the spot, or offered the idea of like interviewing for an internship. And I was like, no thanks, I don't need one. But then the woman who gave me that tour, who I still work with, like politely reminded me that the best way to get hired somewhere is within, especially in this particular field. It's all about relationships. And so I did an internship, and then I began full time the following fall. So I actually started my career as a forensic interviewer. So in the state of Texas, it is not considered best practice for children who were either a victim of a violent crime or witness to a violent crime to be interviewed by law enforcement or CPS, Child Protective Services. Naturally, they are allowed to like ask those initial screening questions to figure out what exactly do we have here? Is this child maybe a victim of abuse, or have they witnessed some form form of abuse. But once there is that, like, general, yes, there's a concern, they bring law enforcement or child protective services brings that child to a place like a children's advocacy center where they are interviewed by someone who is specifically trained on how to question children who have been victimized by abuse. So forensic interviewers, they're not someone who's employed by a district attorney's office or a particular law enforcement agency. They're also not a part of CPS. We're specifically trained in child development, human linguistics, on questioning children in the most developmentally appropriate way that's going to elicit the largest response from a child's experience. And law enforcement and CPS uses that forensic interview as kind of a launching pad for their investigation. So based off of the child's statements that are said in that interview room, they are able to go out and either interview other witnesses, go out to the home, just corroborate a lot of the details and information that's stated in that interview. So I did that for about 3 years. I absolutely love it. I still all the time just practice my forensic interviewing skills to make sure that I still got it. It is a skill that I think is so, so special to have, and definitely something that I don't want to lose. But I transitioned out of that role whenever I got pregnant with my first son, Caden. I did not want to be on call. I think forensic interviewing is a wonderful job for a younger person who maybe isn't necessarily as established in their family, because it is pretty demanding hours. It's a 24/7 job, weekends and holidays included. And so you can and will be called at 3 a.m. to forensically interview kids. And that's just not something that I wanted to do with having a baby. And so once I returned from maternity leave, I took over our center's training and education role. So I am responsible for all of the child abuse prevention efforts in our county. So that's going to be educating children in schools about what abuse is, how it's not normal, how to talk to someone if something like abuse might be happening to them. I'm going to churches, corporate groups, civic groups, really anybody who requests education, we will offer it. I also do some specialized education for school districts. Unfortunately, Texas is amongst the leaders in cases of educator sexual misconduct. And so unfortunately, we have had to educate school districts on a district-wide level of, hey, this is some of the things that can happen to the students on your campus, and this is why it might be hard for you as a staff member to reconcile that this is true and it's a reality for some students. And here's the demographic of students that are likely to be targeted, and here's the demographic of educators who might be likely to engage in this behavior, and what to do and what not to do. Also, reporting laws, because unfortunately, sometimes child abuse goes unreported, or there's just a delay in the report being made. And so we review all of relevant case law for teachers and educators as well. And then I'm also responsible for teaching a lot of parent groups, specifically parenting when it comes to online safety, how to navigate conversations about body safety and private parts and child abuse with your kid at home. Because for me, someone who this is what I do everyday work, it's super easy for me to initiate that conversation. But for the normal person who's not as damaged as me, that's really hard, an intimidating topic of how do we introduce something that's super serious and scary without scaring our kid. And so I'm able to help parents with that as well. And then I'm also responsible for facilitating and coordinating all the professional training that our partners receive. So our advocates, our interviewers, our therapists, our law enforcement detectives, and child protective service workers, they are able to receive free professional training in-house, and that's something that I oversee.
Oh my gosh. Jess, that is a lot. Okay, I have so many questions. I have so many questions. This is amazing and like such important work. I'm so glad I get to talk to you about this today. So, I want to get into everything, but
Uh-huh.
I want to rewind to college. Jess, you're an intern, and were you
Mhm.
were you interning to be having those conversations with kids and doing that forensic investigating? Or like, when were you exposed to that in real life? And how was that adjustment for you? Because that is
Yeah.
so intense and so heavy. And how did you handle that? Like friend to friend, how did you get through that?
Yeah. So, no, I did not need an internship for my degree plan. It was something that I was already working a full-time job as a nanny in college. And so, whenever the idea was presented to me, I was like, I'm already doing school full time. I already have a full time job. Like, no, no thanks. I don't want an unpaid internship. But I ate my slice of humble pie and I did it. And it's probably the best thing that I've done for myself. And so, when I interned, I actually was a short term caseworker. And so I was responsible for working with families who had cases that did not contain any criminal component. And so we are a nonprofit
Okay.
agency. And as you can imagine, we get a lot of reports for suspected child abuse. Not every report that we get contains a criminal component. Sometimes families just need a little bit of help or assistance getting by. So think about the mother who leaves the hospital with a newborn baby who doesn't have a crib or a pack and play, or maybe a family's needing help because they're about to have their water or their lights shut off, or they're needing childcare assistance or transportation assistance. And so those were the types of cases that I was working as an intern. And then with my internship, I was able to do several ride alongs with law enforcement. I ended up transcribing a lot of law enforcement's suspect interrogations, and then I had the opportunity to observe a lot of forensic interviewers done by interviewers at the time. So it was just through observation that I was like, yeah, this is super cool. Because I knew that I wanted to work crimes against children as I started to get older and kind of figure out where I belonged in this criminal justice space. What I really wrestled with, though, as an intern is, did I want to go the law enforcement route, spend my time on patrol, promote to investigations, and be a formal crimes against children detective, or did I want to be a part of CAC staff? And I just remembered like wanting to be the person in the room that that kid trusts more than being the person who is having very limited interaction with the child and is more so arresting the bad guy. I'm all about arresting the bad guy. I mean, my favorite part of criminal justice is the justice part. There's nothing more that I love than seeing people who deserve to go to jail go to jail. Like, I cheer, like, yes. But to me, like, I would have just felt so much more fulfilled working with the victim hands on. And so that's the route I decided to take. And I just always knew from a very early like age that I I've always been very blunt. I've always been straightforward, like what you see is what you get. I'm a very type A straight edge personality. If anybody's familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a type 8. I'm a challenger. And I'm really big about standing up for the little guy and defending people who can't defend themselves. And to me, there's nobody more vulnerable in our population than kids. And there's nothing more to me that gets me like, than like fighting for on behalf of a kid to like arrest the adult who's been taking advantage of them.
Hell yeah, that's amazing. You're firing me up over here. That's that's awesome.
Hey,
Um,
I'm glad you cussed before I did.
I love it. I'm so proud of you. I'm so grateful for the work that you do. And like, obviously, I know your personality and I know your heart. And it's cool to see you go and flourish and honor Like honor that part of you, because that part of you that is that protector and that challenger and that defender is on purpose. And so to see you using that in such a valuable way is like so amazing to see as your friend. But okay, so I want to approach this conversation like you and me, we're sitting down, pretending we're on the couch, like late at night. You're sitting me down as that blunt friend who has two little girls. What is something that you what is something that you would say to me about, like, what is something that I need to know as a mom of little kids, like being raised in this generation? Like, what is something that you just want to scream from the rooftops that every parent should know? Like, just hit me with it.
If there's something I could scream at parents, it'd be wake the hell up. I think parents are waiting for permission or waiting for something to happen or maybe waiting for a child to approach them with questions instead of taking a proactive approach. I think parents for a little while have been asleep at the wheel for far too long. And I think we're starting to see that with kids who have unrestricted access to the internet or kids who kind of seem to run the show and they lack discipline and structure and boundaries because it's not popular and kids don't like it, and parents want to be liked by their kids, but kids need boundaries. They need rules and structure and discipline. And one thing that I say when I'm educating parents all the time is you would never, ever, ever leave your child alone in a crowd. And that's essentially what you're doing whenever you give your kid unrestricted access to the internet or when you're sending them out in an environment away from your care. And it's like, is your kid capable of defending themselves? Do they know what's out there? Are they equipped with the necessary skills to say, okay, wait, this isn't right. I've been told that someone maybe one day try to do this. I know exactly how to respond and I'm going to be cool because there's no kid more vulnerable than the uneducated child. Like
Mm,
that's just unfortunately that's just how it is. And so I always say the most prepared child is the most educated and outspoken child. And so
mm.
that's our job as parents is to educate our children. And I think a lot of parents think that protecting kids from abuse is like sitting them down and having this giant talk like the birds and the bees. I, for one, never got the birds and the bees talk from my mom ever. But it does not have to be like that. Like talking to your children does not have to be this big formal sit down conversation. It needs to be regular conversations and practices that you can implement in everyday life so that it's normalized for them of like, hey, we don't joke about private parts, or hey, we don't do X, Y, and Z, and here's why. Because if it's normal for you that this isn't appropriate with people that you know, one day, if somebody not in your inner circle or outside of our household unit tries this or does something that's not okay, then you're like, hey, wait a second, I know that's not right. We're not supposed to do that. And when you have an educated child, telling a grown up or another teen or another kid, like, hey, that's inappropriate, that's going to shut that person down from continuing to try and further that inappropriate behavior.
So I want to use this time to pick your brain as much as possible. So we're going to set aside the fact that this is an uncomfortable
Yeah.
situation. We're going to get serious. Okay. So tell me
Uh-huh.
what is out there. Like, how bad is this? What are the things that you're concerned about? How prevalent is child abuse? Like, what is the percentage of a 8-year-old kid like getting groomed online? Like, what are you seeing out there? What are the statistics? Let's just get it all on the table so that we can educate ourselves and take the best next step forward.
Sure. So, first, I don't. I want to lead with I don't say anything to scare people. I'm not into fear
Hmm.
mongering. I'm into honesty so that you can feel prepared and equipped to face what's out there.
Me too.
So, as far as stats go, because I work in the state of Texas, I'm mainly familiar with the state of Texas stats. But in Texas, we know that 1 out of every 6 children in high school report being a victim of sexual abuse. And we also know that over 90% of children actually know their abusers. And then we also know that 3 out of every 5 children will never tell someone that they've been sexually abused. So what that means is there's more of a percentage of children out there that are silently suffering that we don't know and that we haven't reached yet than what we do know about. And so it is an issue. It is something that's happening regularly. And that's why we push so heavily for parents and children to start these conversations early. One of the things that I recommend from the very beginning, and something that I practice even with my own kid, is we use the correct terminology for private parts in our household. And it might seem super weird to hear your 1 year old or 2 year old say vagina or penis or breasts. But what you're doing is one, you're teaching them that their private parts are not a joke. Okay, a private part is not a cookie or a no-no square or a wiener. It's not something to be joked about. It's also not something to be ashamed about. Because when we start calling things other names than what they are, it inadvertently teaches kids, like, oh, that's not okay. Like, we don't talk about that. Let's call it something else. So then if something's happening to a child and they feel like they want to talk about it, there's that feeling of this is wrong or this is icky or I'm not supposed to be talking about it. So we use the correct terminology for private parts. One, it gives kids confidence and power, which is super important. But two, it also serves as a protection method for them. So let's say we have a kid who's not using the correct terminology for their private parts, and maybe they are using the word cookie, okay? And let's say you and your spouse and your family knows when your kid says cookie, they're referring to a specific private part. But let's say they go into their classroom setting or their church setting or they're at a sleepaway camp and they tell an adult at that camp or at that school or at that church, hey, over the weekend, something happened to my cookie. That adult is not going to have any idea what they're talking about. They're probably going to write it off and be like, oh, yeah, like, ha, 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 because they're responsible for the care of 10, 12, 13, 20 plus other children. They don't have time to step aside and sit and listen to a whole story about a cookie. Now, if a kid goes up to their teacher and says, hey, over the weekend, someone touched my breast, that is a lot more alarming than, hey, someone touched my cookie. And so we use that as a really big protection method as well. But then let's say you and your family unit have decided a word, hopefully it's the correct word for a private part, and your child suddenly starts calling it something else. Maybe you have referred to your kid's breast as a cookie, but then one day they start coming home and they start calling it something completely different. And you know that, hey, that's not what we taught you. Where did you learn that? Who did you hear that from? Then they're
Mm.
able to tell you conversations that maybe they've been having with someone else. And so that's why we always preach of using the correct terminology. It protects kids in a lot of different ways. But another thing that we recommend, especially with younger children, is modeling the topic of consent in super neutral ways. And I know that might be like, oh my goodness, this girl sounds woke. Like, do I really need to talk about consent with my 3 year old or my 4 year old? And there are child friendly ways that you can model this topic to prove that no means no. And so I'm not saying whenever you need to go to the grocery store, you say, hey, Emma, can you put on your shoes? And she says no. And you're like, okay, I guess I'm not going to the grocery store because no means no. Like, pick a neutral time that's not going to interfere with anything that you have going on and pick something like, hey, can I sit next to you while you watch this show? Or, hey, can I snuggle with you and read a book? And if your kid says no, don't make them feel bad about it. Don't beg them. Don't fake cry and be like, oh, but please, mommy really wants to cuddle you, or mommy really wants a kissy, or oh, that's not nice. Why? Because you're teaching them to compromise their own feeling and own boundary to please someone else. And it
Hmm.
might seem really little, but when that pattern and habit gets repeated, they're going to be more and more and more willing to compromise on their own feelings and desires to please someone else. And so, in your home, when you're asking to do something, or you're asking for an invitation to be in their personal space. Now, this doesn't have to be every time. Every time I want to kiss Caden, I don't ask him, "Hey, can I have a kiss?" Sometimes I just do it. But let's say I'm saying, "Hey, KK, can I have a kiss?" And he says no. And I'm like, "Okay, maybe later." And I walk away. He knows I'm in charge of my body, right? Where if he goes into another environment and someone says, "Hey, Caden, can I have a kiss?" And he says no, and they start having this super emotional or immature reaction, then he's like, that's weird. That's a red flag. My mom and dad listen to me when I say no. You don't listen to me or respect me, or you try to make me feel bad about my choice. You're not a safe adult. And we've told our son, hey, there might be times where someone asks you to do something and you say no. If they make you feel bad about it, you come find mommy or daddy and we'll handle it together. And that's just something that we have to talk with our families about too, of like, I mean, like, I know it stinks to be told no, but if he says no, like, you're the adult, get over it. It really shouldn't bother you if my 3-year-old doesn't want to give you a hug goodbye. And so it's something that's been kind of foreign to some of the our family members, but it's something that we don't compromise on as a family unit, because we really try to push heavily of, when someone says stop, you need to stop. When someone says no, that means no. And when someone's making you feel bad about yourself, or someone's asking you to do something that you don't want to do, they don't respect you. That's a red flag. Like, that should trigger something in your brain that this person is not a safe person.
That is all super helpful. And I love hearing what you do with Caden and your family, because I feel like I'm just going to model everything that you do. So, one statistic that always boggles my mind is the fact that 90% of abusers are someone you know, right? Like, most of the time, it's not the stranger at the park or whatever. It's like a family member or a friend or a family friend, right? And so, are there any additional, and there, you may not have additional red flags for this based on, like, it may be the same across the board. But as far as for the
Mhm.
people that you do know, like in your family friends, your close friends, is there any advice specifically for those situations? Like, are you a hard no on sleepovers? Are there specific things that you like put in place? I'm just curious if there's anything that you would add there.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to kind of address everything that you said, but in different parts. So, yes, there is an overwhelming percentage that a kid already knows their abuser. So, I always say people who are more likely to abuse kids are people who already have access to kids. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be telling our kids not to talk to strangers. Like, that certainly isn't safe, but really we need to be teaching them that anybody has the potential to do something that could be harmful or dangerous. And here's why it might feel confusing, or here's why this happens, or still come and talk to us, even if it is someone that we know and that we trust and we love. And the reason, like, why it feels like that's so easy to happen, or I feel like a lot of the times there's so much despair or disbelief in communities of like, how did we not see this coming, or how did we not see this happen, or this doesn't sound like something this person would do at all. That kind of shock and initial fear is because of grooming. And so there is very much so grooming of the child. And I feel like the simplest way that I can explain grooming is preparing a kid to be a victim of sexual assault. And unfortunately, there are people out there that they have all of the time in the world to groom a child. I kind of, when I'm talking about grooming out in the community, I kind of compare it to a wedding. Like, think about a wedding. That's probably the single most important event in someone's life if they're married. And there is usually a pretty lengthy engagement that goes into planning that wedding. There's every single detail is accounted for, planned, thought out. Like, that event is the same thing. Sex offenders, their event is the assault, and they're going to take the time that it takes to build a relationship with a kid. Why? Because kids have been taught stranger danger. They're not told what happens when it's my friend, or what happens when it's my neighbor or my cousin, or this online acquaintance that I have, or my youth volunteer in my youth group. So they're going to spend some time establishing a common interest. And they're going to spend a lot of time talking about that interest in a totally neutral, non-inappropriate way. They're taking the time and effort to build a friendship and connection with that child. Now, over time, these conversations might progress into things that are more flirty in nature, maybe a compliment here and there. And what they're doing is they're gauging that child's response. If a child doesn't really shut it down, or they kind of play into it, or they seem to like it, whether or not they actually do like it, maybe they're just being polite because they don't know how to say stop. The message that it sends that adult is, they're into this. I can continue this further. A lot of the times we see grooming happen by adult targeting a kid's vulnerability. So if you have a kid who's got low self-esteem, or maybe they have parents that are going through a tricky situation at home. So maybe you have a parent that lost their job, or maybe you have parents that are going through a separation, or maybe there's a sibling in the home who's got a disability or a developmental delay that requires extra attention. And so now you have this kid who feels isolated and not as important, or maybe they're struggling academically, or they're not getting as much playtime on the field. A perpetrator is going to use that to their advantage. They're going to be that kid's listening ear. They're confidant. They're building that dependency. Sometimes you might even see it flipped, where you have perpetrators divulging sensitive information to a kid, like, can you help me get through something, so that that child feels responsible for this adult's emotional well-being, or they feel like, I have to talk to them because they don't have any friends, or they're going through a hard time. And so it gets really tricky when you have a kid who feels like they're responsible for the emotional well-being of an adult. Then you have compliments. And one thing that I have to remind adults is that everybody loves compliments. Like, even us as adults, it could make our whole day if someone's like, oh my goodness, I love your hairstyle, or I love your outfit, or have you been working out? That feels good. It feels even more important to kids because kids are people pleasers by nature. And the younger they are, the more eager to please. And so when you have an adult telling kids, you're so smart, you're so pretty, you're so much more developed, you're so much more mature than other kids your age, they feel on top of the world, which only strengthens that bond and that relationship. And then over time, when things start to progress to being inappropriate, either the sending of inappropriate messages, or maybe there's a brush on the shoulder where it gets too close to a private part, or a rubbing up against on the lower back, that kid is less likely to speak up and say something because they want to give that person the benefit of the doubt. They don't want to believe that this person that they've built this connection with or this friendship with could want to harm them. So they're more likely to suppress their feelings. And again, even though it makes them feel uncomfortable and they don't want it to happen because they like the person themselves, not necessarily the behavior, when they're not saying anything, the message that is being delivered to the perpetrator is, they're okay with this. I can continue and continue and continue. And then you have kids being victims of assault that had no idea that this was going to happen, but they were too scared to say anything the first time things got inappropriate, or the first time they felt like somebody crossed a boundary or violated their personal space. The same way that a kid can be groomed, an environment can be groomed. So you have a person who has really good connections with the family. They or their families do t-ball together, or you invite them over for barbecues, or they help you shuttle your kids back and forth. Y'all do carpool. It can be really, really hard for parents to believe when their kids come to them of, hey, this person's making me feel uncomfortable, or this person's doing or saying things that's inappropriate. It can be really hard for even adults to believe that this person could do something like this because of how helpful they are, or how kind they are, or how well respected they are by the community. But that's what makes them so successful at what they do, is they've established trust and respect by both the victim and their environments around them. Now, as far as sleepovers,
Yes, please.
we try not to be super rigid because we do want Caden. It's such a hard balance of like, now that we know what we know, we can't act oblivious. Like, we can't just pretend it doesn't exist, but then it's also like we want Caden to experience all the joys of childhood that we had as children. And so we are pretty picky on what we do allow. So as of now, while he's little, he does do sleepovers, but it's only with cousins. And all of our cousins live super close to us. I mean, granted, all of our siblings on both sides know what I do for work, so they know I'm pretty serious about that kind of stuff. Now, as he gets older and, you know, his cousins, he's like the second or third to youngest cousin of the group. As he gets older, there's going to be conversations of, okay, like, where's everybody in the house going to be sleeping? You know, your cousins are allowed to have a cell phone. That doesn't mean that I want you on the cell phone. Like, we have the Carlisle family rules. And so if you go into an environment where they don't have the same rules as you do, you know, you're not governed by your aunt or uncle's rules. You're governed by the Carlisle family rules. And if that's no phones at nighttime, or no video games, or no devices in a bedroom where your aunt or uncle can't see you, that's a huge violation. You violated our trust. And so now there's going to be a punishment, which is no sleepover going forward. And so it's really just kind of navigating as he grows and deciding like what's important to us. So I'm not totally anti sleepover. I think it would just be dependent on who the sleepover is with. But what I'm more concerned about is what's being talked about at the sleepover, or what's being used at the sleepover. I would have no issue saying like, hey, you know, we're not comfortable with Caden being on a tablet. We're not comfortable with Caden being on a phone or being on a gaming console. If that's something that you allow, like, maybe I'll just pick him up early, or could y'all not do it while he's over there? I don't have an issue stating what I am and what I'm not comfortable with, but that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of conversations and expectations all around for that. It sounds like, if the answer is yes in any capacity. But I feel like this is the perfect segue, because we have to talk about phones. We have to talk about being online. But I want to make sure that we get this in while we have a little bit of time left. What are you teaching when it comes to online safety for kids? And what do we need to be more aware of as parents when it comes to creating rules, or what kids are being given access to, or what kids may have access to that we didn't have access to? Walk us through what you're teaching for online safety. I would love to hear that.
Yeah, so I am essentially teaching parents and kids the same exact thing, except teens and kids, I'm talking about it as this is what's out there for you. Parents, it's more so this is what you need to know about. This is the conversations you need to be having, but then also like little tips and tricks where you can hack to see what your kid is actually doing online.
Nice.
I know my mom thought there's no way she had social media, but I had an iPod Touch. And so lo and behold, I've got every social media account under the sun, and I didn't even need a cell phone. So that's just me. But when I'm in the schools and I'm talking to teenagers and kids, I'm really talking about the importance of setting up their phone in a way that keeps them the most safe, and talking about,
Mm.
the importance of not sharing your location with anyone and everyone, not accepting friend requests or follow requests from people that you don't know personally. And that's so hard because that influencer culture is so popular right now, and kids want to be little social media influencers. And so it's really hard to ask them to forgo popularity for safety, but that's a choice that they're going to have to make. They're going to have to value self-respect and safety over popularity, which is a challenge, but it's something that we talk about. I talk about, sex offender behavior online. And so those red flags that we talked about with grooming, I spend a lot of time talking about grooming with teenagers. We talk a lot about the most common crimes that are perpetuated online. So that's going to be online solicitation of a minor. And it's also going to be sextortion as well. And so for online solicitation of a minor, that is essentially the plan to purchase sex or things that are sexual in nature from a kid. In Texas, it's really something that's neat about that law is that the kid doesn't actually have to physically show up in order for an adult to be charged with that crime. So and I tell teenagers this all the
Mm.
time, if there's ever someone on the internet that is trying to convince you to leave your home, to go meet up with them at a park, at a gas station, anywhere for the intention of something sexual to happen, that in and of itself is a crime. To call the police, talk to a counselor, talk to an SRO. Kids don't know this now, but sometimes they're too scared to tell. You can text 911. So send 911 a text message and tell them what's going on. And then sextortion is essentially blackmail for either money or more sexual content from a kid. And so the way in which we see this happen a lot is there is an exchange of nude photos, or an online perpetrator convinces a kid to send them an inappropriate photo. Okay. So this kid does. And this perpetrator says, all right, now that I have your photo and I know all of this information about you, if you don't send me more photos, or you don't send me videos, or if you don't send me money, then I'm going to take these pictures and I'm going to post them online, or I'm going to send them to your coach, or I'm going to send them to your parents. And so that element of blackmail for more sexual content or money is another very serious crime that we see kids fall victim to online. And it's not just a girl issue, it happens to boys too. It's both. A lot of parents think that their kid is safe as long as they don't have social media, and that's not necessarily the case either. We see a lot of these actions occurring on gaming networks like Roadblocks. We see a lot of this behavior happen on platforms like Reddit or Discord, where there's this giant chat and you can be chatting about anything. And then somebody on there sees your screen name and is like, hey, I saw that you commented this. I like that. You want to jump over in a chat and talk more about it. And boom, that's that grooming. That's where it has begun, is that private chat. And so I don't sit here and say, like, this app is bad, this app is bad, this app is bad, this app is bad. My general message to parents is anything with a chat feature that gives people the opportunity to have direct access and personal conversations with your kids needs to be monitored. Now, there are apps out there that are not as law enforcement friendly as others, meaning they make law enforcement really, really work for it in order to get proof of that inappropriate behavior that's happened on their sites and networks. But anything with a chat feature needs to be monitored. And that falls back on the parent of, one thing that we have really had to challenge parents with in the community is that phone is your property. As a parent, your kid is given this phone as a privilege. It is not a right. And so having to remind parents that that phone belongs to you, and you can, and frankly, you should be checking that device whenever. Now, that's up to you as a parent to decide if you're going to check it randomly, if you're going to check it if you notice maybe your kid's been on their phone more than usual, or if they're displaying a concerning behavior or suspicious behavior. That's your choice, but I definitely recommend regular phone checks. There are tons of parental control apps that you can download. If you just go to Parents Guide to iTunes, you can kind of cherry pick what features work for you. And then also, having serious conversations with your kids about access to their devices. So, where in your homes are they going to be allowed to have access to the internet? I personally am a big fan of no smartphones, no devices in the bedroom. Putting where you can use your phone and you can scroll social media on the couch in the kitchen while I'm cooking dinner and we can talk and hang out, where I've kind of got a bird's eye view on you, but you're not off in a completely different part of the house, being able to do whatever you want on that phone. Definitely no phones in the bathroom. We also recommend, having your kiddo put their device in a common area of the house before bed, so they're not just scrolling online late at night, because who also is on the internet late at night? Weirdos. So we want to be able to protect them from that as well. And then also, just again, talking about body safety like we did earlier with our young kids, as far as modeling the topic of consent. If you talk about early on what's appropriate and what's not appropriate as far as phone usage, it's going to be very normalized for your teen as they grow up, versus having to awkwardly have a conversation of like, well, how do I randomly establish all these boundaries at 12 or 13 or 14 when there's never been any sort of boundaries before? And so, like, there are times where Caden likes to look at pictures on my phone, and we do that together on the couch in the living room. And that's going to be normal for him. Of when I'm on a phone, I'm on the couch. And we'll talk about, he'll see things on like the kids platform of Netflix, and he goes, "Can I watch that?" And I'll say, "I don't know. I've never seen it before. I don't know what's in it. Mommy's going to have to watch that on her own later to see if it's okay for you." And I mean, it takes extra work on my behalf, but at least I know what my kid is consuming. Having regular, if you do have a kid where you buy them a phone at an early age, reminding them like, "Hey, this phone is mom's. I'm going to look at it. It's not because I want you to be in trouble, and it's not because I don't trust you. It's because it's my job to keep you safe," and normalizing that concept of, "Hey, I'm actually doing my job and caring for you, checking this stuff, because you may not realize that what's happening is wrong, or you may not see it at face value that this person's being inappropriate with you. So I'm going to do my due diligence and double check that on your behalf." As they grow older, it's not going to be this giant foreign concept. It's going to be something that's like, "Oh yeah, like it's Tuesday, my mom's going to check my phone." Or at any point in time, my mom goes phone check and I just hand over my phone and she's going to look at it, whatever. Now, if parents choose not to have those conversations with their kids, that's again their choice as well. But it can be pretty tricky to monitor how your kid is spending their time on their phone if you're not checking it, or if you don't have any parental control apps. And so, one tip and trick that we tell parents is, if you go to a child's iPhone and you go to settings and you click battery, you can look and see how much of your child's battery percentage is being used on each application on their phone. It does not matter if that application is physically on their phone at the time that you look at it or not. You're going to be able to see what they're doing. So if your kid's not allowed to have Snapchat, and when they're at home with you, you look at their phone and you're like, "Oh, they're good. They don't have Snapchat." But they get on the bus, or as soon as they walk to school, or as soon as they get at a sleepover, they download Snapchat and sign into their account, use it, and then delete the app, but not necessarily the account before they get home. Well, now there's a boundary violation. They're using something that's secretive with their phone, and there needs to be some form of action or discipline with that. I always say if you have a kid that's being secretive on their phone, then they are not responsible enough or mature enough for a device that gives them access to social media. Again, that's just my opinion. And I know that makes parents' jobs really tricky, but I always remind people it's not our jobs to be liked. It's not our job to be our child's bestie. It's our job to be parents. And sometimes parenting's not fun. Sometimes it's hard.
Oh, that's really good. Well, yeah, I mean, the common thread for this whole conversation is being your child's advocate, right? Like, that is the most important thing. You are responsible for their safety, you're responsible for their education. And starting from when they're teeny little toddlers all the way up to when they're in high school, you are coaching them, right? You're planting those seeds, you're having those conversations, whether it's I'm not going to force a hug. You don't have to hug your Uncle Ted or whatever. You're planting those seeds and teaching them and educating them all along the way in all of those little things so that as they grow, as they have more access to this and that, they're being equipped with what they need. One of the biggest takeaways for me for this conversation is you're teaching your kids that they are not responsible for adults' emotions, adults' emotional regulation. I love how that was something that you kept saying throughout the conversation. I don't know if it's talked about enough. I think it's becoming more and more popular, that sort of terminology, but it is so fascinating how that is so linked to their safety with spotting unsafe behavior or red flag behavior in adults. It's just interesting, and it's just something that gives me to focus on with my girls as we're having these conversations. So anyways, is there any final advice or just final things that you want to say, whether that's like friend to friend to me as I'm raising my girls, or just anything else that you feel like we didn't cover that you really want to make sure that you touch on?
I mean, I totally agree. I feel like I say all the time, it's not a kid's responsibility to maintain an adult's emotions. And that's common in all forms of abuse, sexual abuse, but also physical abuse as well. You know, adults are solely responsible for their actions and their behavior. And so we never want kids walking around feeling like they deserve to be a victim of abuse. And I also tell parents all the time, the single best thing that you can do to protect your child from abuse is to have a relationship with your child, to have an active part in their childhood and in their life. And I'm very honest with Kaden all the time is, you know, part of a relationship is, and I tell him all the time, mommy's learning how to be a mommy for the very first time. Like you and I, we are working through this together. You're going to do things that I'm not going to like and I'm not going to agree with. And I'm going to do things that you're not going to like and you're not going to agree with. And I tell them all the time, it's okay for you to tell me that you don't like it or you don't understand so that I can help you, but it's not okay for you to do X, Y, and Z. And so it feels scary or intimidating to like have conversations with your kids about, you know, physical abuse or sexual abuse or online exploitation, but just being like super honest with your kids of like, hey, you know, you're a kid. I know you're going to make mistakes. I know you're going to mess up. It's not the mistake that I'm concerned about. It's how you choose to handle that mistake or how we choose to recover from that mistake that matters to me. Because another thing is like kids are being exposed to things that are inappropriate more so than they're actively seeking something out. More oftentimes than not, a kid's going to be exposed to something that's inappropriate without even wanting to see that content. And so parents have to
Yeah.
remember that when a kid is not expecting to see something that's sexually explicit in nature, it can feel really icky and shameful for them. And they might really struggle with, oh no, I didn't do anything. This ad popped up on my tablet, or my friend's brother showed me this, or I got airdropped this inappropriate photo. Now I have to tell my mom, or now I have to tell my dad. And one thing that I feel like I'm constantly as a mother, like replaying over in my head when I feel like my kiddos tested my boundary or broken my rule is like, discipline is about teaching. Discipline is about discipleship. It is not about punishment. It is not about degrading.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, knowing that when your kid comes to you, like, my hope is that it's not, oh my goodness, why didn't you tell me? Or, you shouldn't have been looking at that. Or, why did you click on it anyways? Like, you should have known not to click on it. It's, you know what? Like, I'm so sorry that you had to see that. That might have felt really uncomfortable for you. Are you okay? Who sent this to you? And practice with them. If this happens again, this is how you exit out of it. This is how you block someone. This is how you get out of a site. Because some kids, especially younger kids who are getting their tablets or phones for the first time, they don't know because they don't expect to see naked people on the internet or things that are inappropriate on the internet. And so they've just got this device that they're clicking because they're like, what the heck is this? And it just keeps forwarding them more and more inappropriate content. And so as a parent, understanding that sometimes kids can come into dangerous situations without intending to, and how you respond to the small things, they're going to be able to like gauge how you're going to handle big things. If you're having huge reactions or outbursts to things that aren't as serious, they're going to be super fearful to come to you if something's even more serious or something progresses even further. So the last thing that I would want is a kid who feels like they can't go and talk to their own parent. And that's something that I talk with kids about in schools all the time. Is it is so important that you have a safe adult in your life that you can talk to. Ideally, I hope that every kid has at least 3. And I tell them, I would love for at least one of those 3 people to be your parent. But unfortunately, sometimes kids feel like they can't talk to their parent for whatever reason. But we always suggest a parent and then 2 other adults that kid trusts that's outside of the household, because we know that kids aren't around their parents all the time. And so whether that's, a nurse, a teacher, a coach, a pastor, an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, it doesn't matter. We just want them to have adults that they can feel like they can talk to. But it is so much easier on a family when that person is a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Jess, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation, for being someone who is just so built for this. First of all, it's just, again, so cool to see you walk in your gifting in this and you taking the time educating so many people about this day in and day out. This is hard work and such good work, and I'm just like so proud of you and I'm so thankful for you. And I'm so glad that you were willing to come on today and have these conversations and educate me and educate everyone listening, and for doing it in a way that is not fear mongering, but in a way that is truly empowering. And like you said, education is the number one thing, besides having a relationship with our kids, that helps prevent abuse in our family and in our communities. And so just thank you so much, Jess. I love you so much. And thanks for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me.